Well, I'm glad you guys are all here. And so our topic today is basics of coaching church planners and other innovative ministries. And this content that I'm sharing is coming out of a course that I'm nearly finished with. Fuller Seminary in California is doing a church planter coach intensive, and intensive is the right word, in conjunction with an organization called Cyclical. Really a deep dive into taking ICF models and applying them specifically to people starting churches. And it's been great and amazing and highly recommended. So that's really where the content of this stuff is coming from. And this is just a little kind of sample, bit of an overview. So I'll stop sharing for a minute. So I know everybody but Scott, I think. And so by way of introduction, let's just share what it is about this topic that's interesting to you, or why you showed up today.
I think the idea of accompanying a conversation with somebody with innovative ideas in a context where there's a need for innovation and a desire toward innovation and all that kind of stuff is exciting. So yeah, that.
Yeah, for me, it's I mean, growing up in Catholic, church planting is just not a thing that exists in Catholicism the way it does in other denominations. It just doesn't happen. So then when I started working more ecumenically, I was introduced to this concept, but never really learned anything about it specifically. So I'm just interested in learning about it and what coaching has to do with it.
I'd say for me, our agency does some of this work, probably a little bit different way, specifically geared towards United Methodist. So that'd be my interest.
What agency are you with, Scott?
Discipleship Ministries, used to be called General Board of Discipleship.
For the national organization?
It's general, so it's
oh, you're yeah, the Methodist, sure. Yeah.
We're weird that way.
Yeah.
And other ways too.
For me, it's a couple reasons. Like, one is just, anytime you're talking about something, like a context of it for innovation, I feel like that's going to be applicable pretty broadly. But then in terms of specifically coaching church planters, just it would be, I would just kind of like to have some insight into what you have to say about that. Because I would like to, going forward, I would like to coach pastors and other ministry leaders. So it's just kind of like dipping my toe in, well, what about church planters? Maybe them too.
And I think every congregation's into a church planting mindset if they're going to thrive. So to me, this is a new skill and a new mindset we need to have, and anything I can learn to understand and embrace that. I'm hoping that this will be fruitful time.
Well, that's helpful, everybody. Thank you. Yeah, and I'll say, I think we're gonna focus in on church planting specifically, but I'm hoping that these ideas and concepts, there's a broad kind of general thing too that comes out of this focus, which is where we're going to start a little bit thinking about this kind of hybrid approach to coaching. That's been a really important part of this course. But Jim, I think you're right, and there's we could do the same thing, and we might actually. Jim and I were talking about in the fall. I'm doing some coaching with congregations in transition or that are doing redevelopment kind of work, and there's very similar. So if the church planting specifics get a little, don't get lost in the church planting specifics, but be thinking about how you might apply this, even to the specifics of a project or a client or something that you're working with. So hopefully it'll have some both specific and broader elements and emphasis here. So okay, well, so we're going to dive right in. So this is a little bit of review. from if a couple of you were at my last webinar where we talked specifically about hybrid coaching, and this has been a really key conversation in this course, right? So we all and we know this ICF coaching definition, partnering with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires them to maximize their personal and professional potential, right? And so, as ICF trained coaches, right, we're always very careful to let the client lead and to not, to really kind of stay out of the way. And any expertise we have is really secondary, right, to their what they're bringing in and their conclusions and their interpretations of things. So, but this is true as part of this course. I had a hand in helping shape this course that I'm now taking, but Jim Ledoux did too, because we talked about this idea of hybrid coaching, which we all actually probably practice, even if we don't admit it, where we are bringing expertise and wisdom and experience into this. And so what I like about this is really just acknowledging that and naming it. And so actually a lot of this course has been over the course of 9 months. How do you navigate where you're doing peer coaching or where there's some other more sort of hybrid coaching? So Fuller's definition for this, their working definition for this church planner coaching is similar to the ICF. So they say partnering with lead planters, they're specific about, who is being coached in this process, in a guided, thought-provoking process to catalyze their personal formation and enliven the gospel potential resident within them, their team, and their unique contextual setting, right? So it's related to that peer coaching idea, but there's a couple of things to highlight, right? So the guided is a part of this. So that we know in church planning, we know in redevelopment, we know in all these specialty areas, like there are some best practices, there are some things that are common across these things, and just to kind of say, well, what do you want to talk about is not necessarily serving our client the best, and so still asking permission and still doing these kind of things, but finding a place for that guidance. And then and these are their highlights too, right? That in a peer coaching, the religious, spiritual, gospel elements might not be part of it unless the client brings it up, right? But if we're a coach specifically coaching someone planting a church, that's going to be on board, or probably should be. And then really thinking about context, and this is another one, one of the pitfalls for church planting and other innovative things is not taking context seriously, not recognizing, right? So there's all these, and then to accompany the discernment in that. So it's this nuanced bit, but the really important bit, and this was hammered again, I think in this class, was it's not mentoring. And some of this is to overcome. So in the church planning world, have used the term coaching for a while, and that like a planter would be assigned a coach, but really they're not a coach. They're more of a mentor, generally an older white man who had a successful church plant, but it might have been 20 or 30 years ago. It is probably not in the same context as the person that they're working with, right? So there's all these sort of reasons why this information dump or that sort of mentoring approach is not right. And so when we're thinking about this, it's how do we balance and how do we navigate, holding the coaching approach really centrally, but then also bringing in questions that they might not even be thinking about or having some other frameworks. So, so that's what any questions on the hybrid stuff at all?
Is hybrid, so when you say coaching is not equal to mentoring, pure coaching is not equal to mentoring, and you are also positing that hybrid coaching is not equal to mentoring.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and if it looks like mentoring in the the wisdom of the coach is guiding that's not how it's meant to be, right? So it's not top down, but it's also sort of not purely whatever the client is bringing, because there's stuff that works and there's stuff that we know, and like why why do we make everybody start from scratch as if they're making this up for the first time? There's actually wisdom in the elders and in the church and people that have gone down this path, but also assuming what worked for one person or what worked for me is not necessarily what's going to work for you. Cool. All right, so what I wanted to share today is a bit about this frame that comes out of, this is some of the work that Fuller has done. They have a whole church planning institute and surrounding thing, and a lot of the work of a guy named Dan Steigerwald, who is a really good friend of mine and was my first coach when I was doing this work 16 years ago. And he's now a PCC coach and does coach trainings and church planner trainings. So this is a model that applies to planting, and so that there are different stages. So this is one of these places where when you're coaching somebody who's starting something new, to recognize that depending on where they are in the stages of the process, there may be different focus areas or different approaches. And so to use the plant metaphor of gestation, seeding, sprouting, and then fruiting. And they define them this way. So gestation is discerning the calling and the vision of the planter for the context. That's kind of often pre-work and pre-visioning kind of things. And then seeding would be another phase once that work has taken root. Discovering where the gospel is taking root in their team and is already present in the community. Then there's a phase of sprouting, developing teams, disciple makings, then coming to public expression of church. And then this idea of fruiting, deploying people out on mission, multiplying through the community. Now, this is just one way of framing it. There's lots of ways, but you can sort of see that there may be some moves, right, in a process such as this. And in a, like I'm doing some interim coaching with interim, and interim ministry is a practice. And there are things that generally often happen or steps that you might take that can be a framework. So I'm just going to kind of walk through these. I'll share with you guys the slides so you can have all the details, but just to kind of wrap our brains around these different phases. So gestation is discerning, ramping up stage. And so a coach in this period might help the discerners think about things like, what's the call and where might you plant this church that you are dreaming of or that God's dreaming of through you? Maybe you had an assessment, and how would the lead planter be processing their assessment, or their, if they did personality types or ministry type kind of things. Thinking about a vision and forming a team, getting buy-in from others, raising financial support, identifying other people to dive in, to do a deep dive kind of process, working on team leaders, that sort of thing, right? So that's that early phase of that, and different ways that you might coach different things. Then you think about seeding, the little seed planted there that's going in there. And so there may be different tasks or different focus for a coach in that setting. So thinking about how to activate missional DNA within the team as they form a core group. So that's often the move, is to go from an individual's vision or dream, their calling, and to say, okay, who's with you on this? So there might be areas like thinking about this new team, reflecting on what they found. They've been living in a community. Where is God working? What's already happening? How are they practicing living on mission? How are they passing that on to each other? Where are they doing evangelism? This kind of thing. Thinking about, now they got to think about money and finances, sharing the load with the team, this sort of thing. And then building practices for things like conflict or connecting to others. So that might be some nuances in that second phase. And then often there's a third phase of sprouting. So this is now you've moved out of that initial forming into some place where you're actually building some organizational structure. You're making some things that it's less of an experiment, and now it's more of a thing that could last, that could become a church or some sort of ongoing community. So there might be different questions for coaching in there around what are your discipleship practices for your leaders now that they're doing a bunch of work and doing things. How are you going to measure yourself against this vision? How are you going to move beyond a starting team into an ongoing stable leadership team? What kind of structures do you need? Protocols and things for finances and addressing conflicts, right? More and more structure, these kind of pieces. And where are they drifting away from their mission, from their founding vision, and how might you coach them back into line with that? And then are they living their actual values or just aspired values, and where are they not practicing what they preach, this kind of thing. And figuring out things from when's the public worship, when's the gathered and scattered kind of a thing. And then just managing the team over time. So those are some of the things that might be present in that phase. And then a phase of fruiting. So, and that's more about multiplying leaders, groups, churches. I mean, a lot of the research and efficacy has shown when a church is started with the idea, you know, disciples making disciples and churches starting that will then start other churches, that tends to be really effective. So thinking about that, and then how will they grow, not just by recruiting members from other churches, but actually, you know, some people discovering faith for the first time or re-engaging in different ways. Might be coaching around thinking about who other partners who might maximize or multiply the efforts. Where could they build even into a deeper structure, a wider structure? What nonprofits or other agencies might they partner with? How are they going to keep this going for the long term? That sort of thing. And how might it move beyond one community or one neighborhood and become more of a movement? So that was a really fast blow through these sort of phases, but here they are again, just thinking about these different phases of the life of a new ministry, moving from gestation, where the verb is discerning the calling and vision of the planter for their context, into seeding, where it's a lot about discovering where the gospel is taking root in the team and the community, then sprouting, developing teams, disciple-making processes, expression of church, and then fruiting, which is about deploying people on mission and multiplying through the community. So I'd originally envisioned splitting up into groups and each of us taking one of these to kind of wrestle with, but we've got one great group here. So let's do this all collectively. And I was thinking about what are some of the questions that you as a coach might ask of a church planter in a season of growth, right? You don't have to understand it fully, but just thinking about a different, you know, in these different seasons, what are the different questions? So what might be a question in the gestation phase that you could imagine asking a client that was living in that stage?
I think one of the questions I would ask is, who is God calling you to serve?
That's a great one.
And maybe I'd even ask some questions about what's our identity? What's unique about us versus other faith communities?
And feel free to apply this to other innovation too, right? I mean, I think innovations have a similar kind of a pattern. What might be another gestation phase question that you?
I'd want to hear, tell me about the emergence of this calling from the moment it took root in you.
Yeah.
I would like to ask, tell me about the context, you know, this context that you're planning to plant a church in.
And then there's the vision here, I guess. I'd want to ask about, you know, how do you see this unfolding over the next 3 months, 6 months, year, and so forth? What's this vision look like?
I'd be curious to know what, I mean, as it's the planters discerning their call and their vision, you know, tell me about the fruit that you're looking for. I mean, what is your desired outcome? Paint for me a picture, to use the language that Shanna would often use. And, it's like, okay, tell me about what kind of seed are you holding in your hand, and what is the expected fruit of this in that context,
Yeah, I'd like to at some point hear about the intersection of the calling and the context. What is it about your sense of calling and your vision that, and where does that intersect with this particular context, which is pretty closely related to what Paul is saying too, what's this going to look like?
Yeah, I like that, Paul's idea there of describe the seed that you're holding in your hand. That's a nice way to get a person into a different part of their brain, I think, to talk about this. And that comment reminded me of how we'll often just ask the client to, put yourself really in the situation where you have succeeded, and then describe to me what you're seeing and what you're experiencing in that success.
I worked with a guy one time, and he wrote his 10-year report on what happened to this ministry, like he was in the future writing it back to the people that had funded it. It was fascinating. He just made up a bunch of stuff, but it was really the vision turned into fruit. It was very cool.
I've often used a kind of a visiting tool in a group of people is, take some time to think about what is that front page headline. I serve Sabulin Lutheran Church. So there's a front page headline about Sabulin Lutheran Church 5 years out. What is that article about? And have them come up with whatever it is that they're thinking. It would be exciting. And then build the bridge backwards.
Yeah, in the reinvention world, they often ask for 25 titles of success. Just come up with 25 titles of what success looks like. And it just really challenges you to try to put in a nutshell what your vision is or what it could be across, a wide spectrum. So it's not like one thing. It could be very many things.
So now think about a client who has moved out of this vision, discernment individual stage and is now in the seeding stage, discovering where the gospel is taking root, starting to form a team, starting to listen for God in the community. What kind of questions might you ask there, and how might they be different than the ones you asked in the gestation phase?
I don't know how I'd phrase the question, but I think it'd be curious for them to find out sort of what, if they're encountering others in that context, what are those other people's desired outcomes, and how do those others' desired outcomes affect or connect with your desired outcome? It might, in some ways find out. I often like to say about myself, I'm open to surprise, and I'm willing to have my certainties rearranged. If they're going to start engaging with other people and other people's desired outcomes, to what extent are those desired outcomes of the others going to affect their desired outcome? And then you got to find the alloy, to start mixing metaphors of metal and seed. Find what the alloy actually is going to end up being, and how are you going to work towards that mutual self-interest.
Erik, can you define what you mean by community in this?
That one is more sort of the broader community, right? So it's in that phase, it's both like what's happening within your team and the vision, but then where's God at work in the context might be the better word there.
Okay. So I'd certainly want to ask about how can you get to know this community more intimately?
I'd want to ask, what are the common themes that you're seeing in your team and in the community? And, and then ask, could these themes, what do these themes tell you about how the Spirit might be at work here?
These are great. Okay, let's think about the sprouting phase. So it's moved beyond, sort of a core group team, and now they're really starting to think about the expanded team leadership. Maybe they're building some attention toward disciple making and formation. Hopefully, although this is often rushed, they begin to go public with whatever they've been practicing. But so this is more where it looks like what we might call a church start. What might be some of the questions that you'd ask in that phase?
I begin to wonder with them who the strategic, there's different blossomings going on. Who are the strategic stakeholders of whichever particular blossom? So who are you going to work with? How are you going to work with them regarding that particular aspect that is starting to sprout?
This
Yes.
point, you can
Go on.
anticipate that there will be some conflicts occurring, some places where there are challenges or rubs between the vision and what's actually happening, and sort of delve into what are we learning through those.
What is your team formation strategy? And like things like what kind of communication system do you need to develop to keep the teams connected to each other and aligned with each other around the mission and vision of this project and so forth?
And I was building on that too, just focusing on, what's the criteria for selecting team members, and then how would they be onboarded?
I was thinking about how do you manage disappointment when the reality doesn't live up to the vision, or be ready to notice that there might be disappointments coming.
And then what are all the opportunities you have to publicly express this project? Like what media will you use? What's the message? Who's in charge of the message? How you deliver the message? What's the target audience? All that business.
That's a phase 2 where you go from fly-by-night finances to actually maybe having to prove that there's growth or prove that there's sustainability. So there's some big financial and structural questions.
Mm-hmm.
But how about the fruiting phase? Thinking about really deploying people out on mission, multiplying mission, connecting to other organizations, communities, making this more of a movement than an isolated thing. What might be some of the questions you'd ask there?
Holy shit, now what?
Who else could you collaborate with? Who could support you?
Here's where I need a little help. Are we assuming at this point that the church is already established, it's functioning every week, and it's got all of its ministries up and running? Is that what we're assuming here?
Yeah, and as one of my teachers said, all categories leak, right? So all of these are probably going on at the same time. And so yes, but yeah, this is leading into the things are working, and now it's trying to think about how do you extend and multiply.
A question I've used, I think, along these lines is it may be more of someone sprouting and thinking about fruiting. Is what does it smell like when it's successful? What does it smell like? Just to engage a different sense of things.
Mm-hmm. Building on those senses, I think, what would you hope to be hearing? What would you be seeing? And I like the senses.
I think of a question like, what are you doing now that you could do better with other people or communities, or with more impact?
Yeah. Describe what growth looks like. What does
Yeah.
that word mean?
And also, like, where are you seeing these things sort of bubbling up on their own? Like people who are possible partners who are expressing interest, or people who are already involved in it, who are making connections beyond this project.
Oh, and connected to that, how might you step down from leadership, or how might you transmit or pass on leadership to another leader or another group?
Who are we not currently reaching?
These are great questions, you guys. We'll have to transcribe this and come up with this list. So yes, thank you. So do you see how the different phases are going to really impact different questions? And if you're coming in, I mean, you know, all coaches can do a great job just, you know, intuitively, but knowing that there's a framework, it might shape the kind of questions you ask or the kind of questions you might not ask, right? I mean, if you're in fruiting and you're still trying to get your vision clear, that's a really big problem, right? Or if you've already launched a worship service and you don't have a team, you might want to, have you thought about, right? And so this or another sort of framework, you know, can sort of keep pace with how this works. So I created a couple of little case study scenarios for us, and these are mostly real from my life, so I'm asking for advice and help. And so here's one scenario. So you've got a client who's in the gestation phase, right? And they have a vision for this church that they want to build. They're super excited. They want to, next Sunday, they want to have a worship service, but you're the coach and you realize that they're the only leader. They're going it alone. They haven't built a team. What kind of question, thinking about the, you know, those kind of 4 moves, what questions might you ask based on your insight and knowledge that's still coaching? How might you frame that where you're like, oh, this is going to go bad unless they built a team, without just telling them that? That makes sense?
Yeah.
The non-mentor coach approach.
This reminds me of a time when I was a director of a program, and my CFO asked me on a regular basis, what is your drop dead plan? And she would ask me that regularly, basically, if you die tomorrow, what's going to happen? And that always made me think about a team. That's a great one.
Yeah, I would often ask, you know, my question would often be around, you know, what's going to happen? You know, let's say you get hit by a bus, you know, then what?
Mm-hmm.
And in that same vein, we often talk about what's the legacy you want to leave with this organization or with this initiative? How's it going to get passed on?
I might ask about what are the dangers you see for yourself in leadership moving forward? Or where are you going to wear out or burn out? Good, those are good ones. All right, scenario number 2. So your client's in the seeding phase. They've built a team of excited leaders. They're gathering weekly to dream together, and they've started to discern a calling to some sort of creative church that involves art and music and food. So they've been doing some experimenting with different ways to gather and worship, but they're really still just playing around and working out the details. So now they want to create some online advertisements and draw a bunch of people to these weekly gatherings. However, as the coach, you have a sense that they need a little more time to figure out what their vision really looks like in concrete terms, and to practice whatever it is they're going to do before they take it public and bring in a lot of new people. So what kind of questions might you ask in that scenario where you're having that insight about where they're at?
What are you inviting people to? And, you know, like, again, like sort of like, draw me a picture of like what this gathering will look like from in the eyes of someone who's visiting, who's coming for the first time.
Yeah, let's brainstorm about what could possibly go wrong.
I think about what kind of structures do you need in place before you have 3 times as many people as you currently do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
What will this
question made me think of the opposite. Like, what will this look like when it goes right? And your question, Erik, was kind of that same thing, like.
Yeah, what will the imagine yourself walking into this experience for the first time. What will that look like and feel like from that person's point of view?
I'm still on that one. I like that one a lot, Jim. So one of the dangers, this scenario happens a lot, and one of the dangers in this, and this growth model, this sort of organic plant model, emphasizes this, is so often church planners are excited and they want to do a solo vision and launch a worship service, but haven't done the kind of underlying work. And these folks that I trust and believe in and have seen in action, if you don't build the leadership and the team and the practices of that team before you go public, there's a lot of danger there. That's often the push, both from the planter and from whatever denomination or organization is funding them and looking quickly for results. So this is one that is not an uncommon scenario. All right, so here's another one. Your client is in the sprouting phase of their dinner church, where they gather weekly for meals, scripture, and community. Their original vision was to reach out to people outside the church, but you as a coach are noticing most of the participants are also members of other churches. What questions might you ask them in this scenario?
It's like, well, when you came into this coaching engagement, here's what you were telling me. Here's what I'm seeing now. Tell me about this difference. What does this shift mean?
I'd want to make sure, and maybe you're implying this, that they are already well aware that their clientele are from other churches and not outsiders. I'd want them to, I'd be curious, describe for me who your clientele are, where are they coming from? And then, okay, how you describe for me how you will reach the non-church going communities.
All right, here's another one, this last one. So your client's in the fruiting phase of their new church. They have a vibrant community focused on serving their literal neighbors. Other more established churches are starting to notice. And so now you have the sense, you're getting the sense that your client is starting to see these other churches as competitors. They're doing a thing, and these other churches are competing for that. So you see a possible conflict brewing kind of with the other churches in the area, and really believe that the most fruitful path for this person you're coaching is collaboration rather than competition. So what questions might you ask this client?
If they're seeing that there's this possible conflict brewing, as a coach, I guess I'd be curious as to how much they feel it's important for them to address it. If they're not wanting to address it, I can't make them do what I think they should do. I'm simply coaching them.
I might ask them about kind of their mindset of scarcity versus abundance, and what's unique about their setting versus others.
I think I would also want to check my hunch that they're seeing these other churches as competitors by saying, oh, I had it a minute ago. Forgot what I was going to ask.
I don't know if a question, what sort of collaborative opportunities do you have with these partner parishes? I mean, assuming that in the conversation that's preceded it, that they've brought to your awareness and are the awareness of these partner parishes are there. And then, I'd be listening, the nonverbal cues or the other, the language and verbal language that they're using is the language they're using a language that's painting a picture of competitiveness, and then try to use different language in a way, partnership things or whatever.
Would it be worth asking what the other church perspective is? Like, how do they see fruitfulness, the other church, and how are you impacting their work? Something along those lines, maybe.
Yeah, it would be interesting. Put yourself in church C's position and tell me what they are seeing. Walk in their shoes for me and describe what they're seeing when they look at you.
Also makes me think about, I'd probably put it in my self-assessment that this would be a really good question to raise before, in the previous stage. What does collaboration look like? How do you think your congregations would respond? How might you partner with them in that process?
Yeah, I was thinking that too, Jim. This could be avoided if the other stages were sufficiently coached.
Yeah, I mean, these competitive churches, quote unquote, could be conversation partners in the sprouting phase.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would think you wouldn't want to be in a community where you're not welcome. So I don't know. Again, I don't know much about church planning, but I would think you would be looking for opportunities where there are needs that are not being met. And so you would sort of have your particular niche. But I know that's kind of pie in the sky. And I know the realities are different and churches do compete.
Well, I like that doing some coach assessment, thinking about, okay, if I were to do this next time, I should have asked this in a previous phase. Like if we're here now, how much of that is on what I didn't ask? I think that's interesting. I think this is one of these real complicated ones because, if you can, it's like as a parent, like I see where if you take that road, it is 89% going to lead to this outcome and you're not going to like. And how much do you step in and how do you not, right? But also just to leave somebody like this hanging and just, try to coach them on what they're paying attention to. It really could be a disaster, right? I mean, this could kill their whole 5-year project if all of a sudden they, come up against, some big pastor in town that has the ability to shut them down or something, So this, again, it gets more and more complex and more tricky to walk that line when there is insight and expertise and practices that we know church plants do better when they collaborate rather than compete. That's just like true. And so, yeah, how do we find our way through that?
Yeah, well, that could be one of those situations there where you say, so I've seen this before. I've learned some things about this. Would you be interested to know what the research is on this topic? That's an opportunity where you could share some wisdom like that if the client's open to it.
Yeah, which again, in the ICF model, that you're letting the client direct, even though you have a suggestion, right? But you're able to come back. So this next part, I just want to tell you because I think it's important, and I don't know how much it gets into this, but you see on the right-hand side are these phases. On the left-hand side are some even more kind of dialed in specific steps and practices. And this is, so in the gestation phase, there's some work to do around absorbing, relating, serving in this early phase. And then in seeding, there's actually could be a couple of sub steps, embedding in the community, initiating something, and sprouting. There's practicing and maturing, and then in fruiting, hubbing, and extending. And this comes out, this is Dan Steigerwald's work, which most people have never heard of, but this book is really, really good. It's kind of a step-by-step guide, and the kind of thing that I haven't used it with a client, but I could imagine if somebody's coming fresh to have a workbook, kind of a document to work alongside of somebody. 1001 Churches from the PCUSA has a coaching guide, and they've got some really good materials on, you know, kind of the process of vision and all this kind of thing. So there are some resources, but I found this really helpful in thinking about church planning, that's different than just drop a franchise in a new place, but really, and these are Dan Steigerwald's 6 dynamics. So thinking about embedding, rooting in a context first, rooting in relational networks before you do anything else, just being part of the community, which a lot of church planners skip. And then initiate is say, okay, you've learned something in this community. What's the response? What is God's call? What is the message? What's the missing piece in this community that you might be called to embody, and to start doing that, start practicing it with other people. And then the third one then is practice, right? So as you practice with the core group, what is it that you're inviting people into? That was that question, right? Like what is the thing that you're hoping, and do it before you do it. And then mature is really becoming a thing. And this is where church planners, like I said before, often leap to public worship when really that's step 4. And so I'm thinking, you know, in coaching, how are you encouraging them, and then also, you know, helping them see, do they need to rush? Have they completed the work of one phase or another? And then they talk about hub, which is connecting to other groups that are doing similar things and sharing resources, and then really extending is kind of the big model. So I've just found this really helpful as a framework, kind of alongside the other one. I just wanted to throw that into your awareness. So this is a lot of stuff, right? And so when you're thinking, you know, when you come into coaching, you're trying to be in the moment and whatever, but now you've got, okay, we're thinking about 4 seasons and 6 dynamics. And then the denomination has metrics. They want to see this many people and this much dollars. And then, you know, the planter has things that they're trying to work on. And then there's a crisis in their family, right? I mean, and just all of a sudden it's like, it's just so big. And so that's one of the challenges around here with this kind of work, where you're coaching into a process or into a practice. So a couple of things, many of us have heard of the coaching wheel. This is Neil's wheel. I don't know if people are familiar with this. This is kind of the personal coaching thing, but just some sort of image where you can, you know, you sort of color in on the thing. Okay, well, you know, my client's doing really well on finances and on the, you know, this, and they're not feeling real fulfilled. So we'll color in this area, right? So you can just sort of have a visual over time in your own mind to sort of track how your client might be doing. Here's one I developed thinking about church planners in particular. What are the various things I want to keep in my vision, right? To just be asking and thinking about. It's like, I haven't heard much about mission, vision, values in a long time. Maybe that, or like how they're really, or they're super clear on that or not clear. Things like planning and strategy, team, conflict, the health of the leader, the finances, you know, all these different sort of factors, so that rather than trying to hold it all, you know, in your head, to have, you know, some sort of a tool to be able to gauge just kind of where things are at any given time. This is one that comes from 1001 Churches, from their materials, right? It's just kind of on a scale of 1 to 5. What's discipleship looking like? Where's their connection to the denomination, right? So ways to track and keep aware of some of these things, which might then shape the questions you ask or the avenue you go down, because they're managing 1,000 things, and how are you tracking them? So the other model is thinking about a dashboard, you know, like in your car, where you've got to track 13 different things: your speed and your gas and what's the temperature outside and all this, right? And so a dashboard becomes sort of an at a glance at any moment, you might not be looking at it, but you're like, oh, I wonder where this is. And so these are some things when thinking about planners, is what might your dashboard be, and what might those elements be. So it might be as simple as tracking where's the planter's wiring and health, how's the team, how's the church, how's the coaching relationship, and how's the coach, right? So it may be just those 5 moves on a piece of paper, right? And it can build and develop. But underneath it, each of those, maybe they're thinking about their assessment, or what are their gifts and where are they lacking, right? So if the person you're coaching is a really charismatic leader, but they struggle to build a team, having that written down somewhere where you go, oh, I need to ask them about their team building, just to have a thing you might keep in front of you. Again, the coaching wheel, think about social base, and then where are they, how are they functioning as a leader, those sort of things. Under team health, it might have the names of the leaders, might have conflicts, things that you're noting from call 3 that you might write down, you're like, that's going to pop up again, that kind of thing. And then how they're doing related to their goals, the diversity of the team, the size of the team, that kind of thing. And then thinking about, you might be tracking the health of the church, right? So all these different things, instead of trying to hold them all together, to really think about what would be the framework to keep these in front of us, right? And so here's a really simple one, right? That just is, the person's name, some back, just a little bit of notes. Oh, here's the team. Put some notes down about, Bailey, she's an entrepreneur and she's got tech experience, and that's going to be important when might come back later when I'm asking about how are you using your leaders, to know some details, that kind of thing. So here's a real fancy one. This comes from Cyclical, just kind of a design one, but you can see, you might want to track what kind of gifts they're using. Are they equipping? Are they multiplying? Are they doing most of the work? Are they managing? I don't exactly know what this one tracks, but you could do different rings of social base. This one I like. It's sort of a gas gauge on where are they spiritually, where are they physically, where are they emotionally, the size of the team, how are they doing on diversity. APEST is the apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher stuff from Ephesians. That's good to have a balance of on the team. And then here's some ways, to track your own insight as a coach, maybe have your own speed gauge on, or am I leaning too much into mentoring? This is sort of what's the status of our coaching relationship? Are we in reverse? Are we in neutral? Are we driving? And then this graphic I really like, thinking about those different phases and how healthy, sustainable the project is. Naming, we're really in a sprouting phase. But here's a filled out one, right? So okay, they're in the sprouting phase and they've done some good work. And what are some notes? So so that's one way. So my question to you is, what might you put on your dashboard if you were going to make a dashboard like that? Can you think of some things that might be on yours? I'm going to stop this so we can look at each other. What are some things you might want to track for church planters, or any project, any innovation, any coaching?
I like that team stuff that you had on those dashboards. The one that was size of team relative to goal, diversity of team, and I wondered if there would be a way to connect. I'm thinking of clicking through these things. So like if those little images had the names of the team members, and you could hover over it or click over it and get that little note about that team member. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about it'd be cool to talk to a web designer, see if they can make that kind of stuff happen.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
I like that. If you had, I like just simply that your question that you're positing to us is a great question for the coach themselves. What would they like to have on their dashboard? as they think of the things that they need to keep track of. Imagine, paint for me a picture of that dashboard that you would like to have in your present context.
Yeah, like build it together. I like that a lot. What can I help you track? Right. Yeah. That's great, Paul.
I like tracking like key stories or key learnings over the course of a coaching engagement, things that I never want to forget about this person or this team. And,
It's a different type of tracking, but we use a celebrations log quite often.
yeah.
Well, that's all I got, and we are exactly at time. Any final thoughts or questions, or what didn't we cover that you hoped we would for another time?
Thanks, Eric. It's a good introduction for me.
Yeah, it is helpful. I kind of have a housekeeping question more for Jim than for everybody else, but it's just, this continuing ed thing as it counts towards our ICF continuing ed.
Yeah.
How do we, the nice thing when you sign up through ICF for things is it kind of automatically keeps track.
Yeah,
How
we have
how
a
do we-
manual list, yeah, and actually Chris Alsum is we have your list from the previous times you've also shared. She was actually looking into something that as a way of, speaking of dashboards, just kind of keeping that. Otherwise, and then they've talked about, are they going to just send an email template out or make it just a certificate that you send for each one of them? And like, for example, today, this one, we didn't do a lot of direct, coaching competencies. You'd get 1 credit for resource development. But she has all that information. And Felix was also checking with ICF because they're changing a lot of things starting August 1st. So at this point, we've just had a holding pattern, but actually Chris is scheduled to send you whatever they decide this Friday for this one. And then she'll go back and do the same template for the other ones. Because it would have been nice to have it some automated piece. I don't think that's going to happen, but you will get one that you keep on file. And then we also keep those for our own records to verify for you.
Okay.
One other piece, just FYI for you. On Thursday, we'll send out another coaching community email that will have the link to the YouTube piece. And then Eric, if you're willing to share with me your slide deck, we'll also include the slide deck with that too. So you have access to that.
And I've got some little handout things
that'd be great.
I'll submit. I'll give you some too. There's some fleshing out of some of these concepts and things. And then there are some resource links. There, I'll just put it up. They're in the slide deck, just of the link to that book, Fuller's course, Cyclical, and they have a path for renewing churches and for new churches, and their stuff is really good. It's really good stuff. There's that coaching manual I talked about, and then my stuff. The other resource, Jim, you might want to look into this, is Fresh Expressions. I don't know if you've encountered that too much.
I've heard about it.
Yeah, we can have another offline conversation, but that was started in England, where the Church of England said we don't need to plant churches. Every square inch of England is part of a parish. Why would we start something new? And that's where that emerged from. They're doing some cool stuff.
Hey, can I ask you all a question? Anybody recently try to renew their ICF credential? I did mine in November, December. I contacted them like in February, asking them what's going on, and they say they are so backed up they just can't get approvals through. Anyone else have anything like that? Because I'm 6 months later and I still don't have my renewal.
Well, that was the challenge for us being certified. They were so backed up. We waited months and months, about 6 months longer than we ever expected. So our things are slow, but we do have a couple other ones where we have some inquiries. Jim, I could at least, we do have two people that are kind of tend to respond quicker, and it sounds like they're kind of all generalists that can help. I could at least see what happens, but put your name in and just see, do you know anything about the status of the renewal?
Are you talking about your membership renewal or your ACC
No,
credential?
it's my PCC credential.
Your PCC credential.
Yeah. I also think there's so many things changing with this August 1st deadline. One, I know that they're rushing to get that ready. And I also think they might even be intentionally waiting so that what they send you actually reflects how they're, because they're changing some titles and names and different things. I wouldn't actually be surprised if they said, we're just not going to deal with that till after August 1st and when we have everything nailed down.
Okay.
So, but if you're
All right, thanks.
open to it, I'm happy to just raise that, just saying one of our coaches has
Sure.
asked that.
Yeah, sure.
Is yours like expired, Jim? Is that the, like,
What's
are you
that?
are you at the end of your 3 years?
Yeah, I'm the end of my
thing?
first round with my PCC, and I'm just getting it renewed.
Hmm.
So
Well,
I
thanks
guess
for all
I'm not
your time. Yeah.
officially not a coach at this point.
Yeah.
We're just all, the rest of us are just such novices that we haven't gotten that far to actually have to renew something like that yet.
Yeah, mine got processed fast. So
I warn you, it takes a long to start 6 months before you need to read.
Yeah,
good to know, actually.
No
Yeah.
kidding. That is good to know.
Yeah.
Oh.
All righty.
Well, I got a bid
Well,
farewell to everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Eric, for leading us.
Thanks, you guys.
And,
Good to
we'll
see
send
y'all.
out the recording. Have a good rest of the
That's
day.
good. See ya.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Shannon.